Welcome to the NLP View with your host, Donna Blinston. Each week, Donna will explore how the techniques of NLP can help improve your personal and professional life. And now, here's your host, Donna Blinston.
Hello everyone, and welcome to the NLP View radio show. My name is Donna Blinston. On today's show, I'll be speaking to Beth Lambert, author of the best-selling book, A Compromised Generation, The Epidemic of Chronic Illness in America's Children. Beth Lambert is a former healthcare consultant and teacher who founded Epidemic Answers in 2009 in order to educate people about the epidemic of chronic illness affecting the current generation of children, providing preventative and healing solutions for parents, caregivers and future parents. Beth is focused on learning disabilities, namely ADHD, ADD, autism spectrum disorders, amongst other chronic illnesses, and found that those learning disabilities are treatable both medically and therapeutically, explaining that children with autism have profound systemic biological dysfunction. Beth's work shows that the correction of these dysfunctions and the holistic and psychotherapeutic assessment of these children can rapidly improve, if not remove, the symptoms and their child's behaviour. Neuro-Linguistic Programming, NLP, is a way of understanding how we use language to program our brain. NLP helps us to understand how we process this information and create a simplified version of our experience in our mind. This is often referred to as subjective experience, which in NLP we study, aiming to understand how individuals put their experiences, pictures, feelings and actions together, and how effective they are at achieving the results they want. This enables the recognition of any limiting behavioural, communication, learning or emotional patterns, and provides tools needed to do something about it. So I'd like to welcome to the show Beth Lambert. Hello, Beth.
Hi, Donna. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, you're welcome. You're really welcome. Thank you for joining us today on the show. I believe personally that it's so important to provide families with as much information as possible to help them find answers and to understand basically what's happening with their children. I can do a lot from the NLP side, and I'm sharing my knowledge and interviewing inspiring people like Olive Hitmot, who recently joined us on the show. But there's also the other side, which is what you're an expert in. So I believe it's right to provide that side as well. So thank you for joining me today.
Happy to be here. Thank you.
Before we start, Beth, could you tell our audience about yourself?
Sure. I never thought that I would be in this sphere, in this realm at all. In fact, probably 6 or 7 years ago, I didn't really even know what autism was, nor did I really give much thought to ADHD or allergies or any other chronic conditions. And then I became a mother, and my oldest child, I now have 3 kids. My oldest child, when she was about 2 and 2.5, started developing all kinds of bizarre symptoms, and was the kind of thing that, we went to gastroenterologists and allergists and as many different kinds of mainstream physicians as you could think of to try and figure out what was going on with her. She had sensory issues, she had behavioral problems, she had eczema, she had a distended belly, she had all these kinds of strange symptoms, but nothing that really merited a diagnosis from the perspective of conventional medicine. And it was a real problem. I mean, really, it was behavioral, and it was way more than the terrible twos or any kind of typical developmental stages. And what we found is that physiologically there were all kinds of things that were happening with her that were out of whack, that were imbalanced, and it was manifesting itself in symptoms, particularly behavioral symptoms. And so we found this by going to a physician who specializes in treating children with autism biomedically. And then we also started working with holistic healthcare practitioners. And what we found is that she had all these tremendous imbalances in the bacteria in her gut, known as gut dysbiosis. And she had inflammation throughout her body. And she had tons of food sensitivities. So everything we were eating that she was eating, and we were trying to feed her healthy food, but all the healthy food she was eating day in, day out, were actually causing inflammation in her body. And what we found was that this inflammation, this chronic state of inflammation that she was in, and some exposure she had in an environment, they were contributing to behavioral behavioral symptoms. And so it was a big wake-up call for me as a parent. But I also started to look around and realize that all the children I saw on the playground, the kids with the red cheeks, the kids who had eczema, the kids who had oppositional behavior or, different kinds of problem behaviors, that there was something going on physiologically, and there was a biological basis for much of what was going on with them. And so that's where I began my journey and started researching, and that's when it resulted in the development of my book, which was looking at why are so many kids affected and what can we do to help them.
Wow. Well, I take my hat off to you. I can only imagine. I've got a young little boy myself. He's 18 months now. And I can only imagine what it must be like wanting to find those answers and not getting anywhere, despite knowing yourself as a mum that there's something else that you're missing. So it must have been hugely rewarding, I guess, for you from a mother's perspective, let alone from a bigger's perspective.
Absolutely.
To be able to pin things down and give answers.
Yeah, definitely. And I now have an 8-year-old who has no symptoms, no problems, and I feel very strongly, had I not intervened, had we not changed her diet and done some therapeutic work and holistic healing for her, that she would probably have some kind of diagnosis like a bipolar disorder or some kind of quote psychiatric diagnosis. Certainly, she'd have a learning disability. There would be issues, but she's normal, healthy, thriving, happy. And my kids subsequently have sort of avoided those problems because I now know what the contributing factors are. So it's very rewarding, and I feel like it's my mission to let other parents know that if they see the signs in their kids, that there's interventions, there's things you can do to help get your kids on the right track.
And do you think that this can be done at any age? Does it need to be caught early, or can it be, say you'd now discovered it with your daughter being 8? Would now be too late? Would problems be ingrained?
I think you can intervene at any age. I think that everybody's problems are different. Everybody's imbalances in their bodies are different. But I think the best work can be done when you start early, obviously. I mean, if you find the soft signs in an infant or a young child, a toddler, that child's going to have the best outcome. But you can take somebody who is, 60, 70-year-old and do similar kind of interventions and change their life. There's a great story in the medical literature of a woman who was 74 years old, and she had schizophrenia, and she had been institutionalized her entire life for pretty severe symptoms associated with schizophrenia. And then at one point, somebody in one of the institutions, a physician, recommended that she try going on a gluten-free diet. And she tried removing wheat because she had a wheat sensitivity, they found. And it wasn't celiac, and it wasn't something you found in your traditional standard lab work. It was a sensitivity. They removed wheat from her diet, and all of her symptoms of schizophrenia disappeared. And, this is the kind of thing that's starting to come out. It's in the medical literature now. But that's a 74-year-old woman. And then all of a sudden she was, normally functioning and didn't need to be institutionalized anymore. But the point is there's things that you can do at any stage, but certainly the earlier you start, the better outcomes you're going to have.
I certainly see with our patients from an NLP coaching perspective, because we look at the whole person from a holistic perspective, you look at, as well as whatever they're coming to you with from a mental perspective, but you also look at their diet, their weight, their general health, because you want to provide them the full support around whatever it is that they're looking for. And one thing that we do look at a lot is, I look at particularly, is the nutrition and things like that, exercise and that whole healthy, well-balanced lifestyle. And people are changing, and it's interesting to think how much of that is as much the NLP side, but also the additional support with the better diet.
Right, and I think it's part and parcel of the same healing journey. I think you can't separate them out. I really think that there are things that you do biomedically, interventions such as changing diet, nutrition, healing modalities for detoxifying the body, etc. But I also think that there's therapies that are critical too, especially after sort of neural pathways have been established, because you need to make new connections, right? And especially for children who developmentally their pathways become divergent, and they go in ways that aren't really the best for them. And so you need to reestablish new networks, new neural networks, and you need to. Luckily, we have this amazing capacity for plasticity in our brain and the ability to change the pathways. And so I think that therapies that do that go hand in hand with biomedical interventions and present the best outcomes.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I couldn't agree more, Beth. Mm-hmm. We see so many, on a simplified level for our audience, people who suffer from irritable bowel, they might come with an irritable bowel problem, or when I'm discussing their problem around stress or a worry about work or career change or whatever it is they've come for, one of the symptoms that they might have is an irritable bowel syndrome. So they've got that internal conflict going on, whether that's the source is an organic source, whether it is their biochemics, I guess. But because of their stress levels, their anxiety, their worry, they're causing changes in their energy, which are affecting their gut and inflaming the irritable bowel. So with what you were just saying, there's definitely that component that they do go hand in hand. You can't be very well resolving the problems, but if you don't undo the reasons why the problems were there in the first place, we've got nowhere.
Right, exactly. And there was a great book written in the 80s by Michael Gershon called The Second Brain, and talking about the enteric nervous system, so the entire nervous system that's located in your gut. And the connection between the gut and the brain is something that, in traditional Western medicine, we don't recognize the way we should. And it's sort of the whole mind-body approach. But really, we're beginning to unravel that a little bit and understand the connection between what's going on mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and how our physical health is presenting. And so we're making progress, though. There's a great new book out called Bugs, Bowels, and Behavior, and it makes the link between the gut and the brain, and how if you have neurological symptoms, if you have behavioral symptoms, oftentimes it's important to look and see what's going on, not just emotionally, spiritually, behaviorally in your environment, but also to look at what's going on in your gut. What are you putting in your gut? What are your exposures to your gut? Because they're all intricately linked.
They are, definitely. I've recently interviewed the gentleman called Grant Zazulu and Marvin Oka, who are the founders of M-Braining. And that it's an advancement on NLP where they look into the three brains. And that's really advancing. A lot of their foundation work stems from what you were saying. And they were saying that we have got obviously our head brains, but we've also got a heart brain and your gut brain. And it's the links between the three, and there's more research being done which has suggested that there is other brains and how everything is, as you say, neuropathically all connected, and what affects one has a knock-on effect to the rest of the body.
Exactly, yes.
One thing that really struck me with your book was your explanation of the perfect storm, where you described the environmental factors, the overuse of medication, the poor diet, nutrition, the lifestyle factors, and the vaccinations. And how all that, in a way, you've referred to it as environmental toxins, which I guess it stems on from what we're saying. I guess we don't actually appreciate how much of a turmoil is going on within the body. Right.
And I think we're looking for a single causative factor, right? So in traditional Western medical research, we're looking for, especially because we're so enamored with genes right now, with genetics. And so we're looking for that gene that explains autism or the gene that explains ADHD. And we're paying way too much attention and way too much research to that, when really what we ought to be doing is look and see, well, what's changed in the last 20, 40, 50 years, because that's when we're seeing the skyrocketing rates of all these conditions. And so if you start deconstructing that, what you see is that the Western lifestyle, and I wrote particularly to America because I think it's probably worse in America, but it's just as bad in the UK and it's just as bad in developing nations as well. But the point is that we have changed our lifestyle. And so the modern interventions in particular, there are things that we do sort of routinely without even thinking about that have consequences. For instance, we give antibiotics for every sore throat, every ear infection, every cut, bump, and bruise seems to merit a prescription of an antibiotic. And the problem with that is that we are destroying our microbiome, which is the ecology of our gastrointestinal system. We have trillions of bacteria that are in our gastrointestinal system, and they play critical roles. I mean, they help us make neurotransmitters. So if you have an imbalance in neurotransmitters, say depression, which has to do with the levels of serotonin, for instance, being altered, you have to look and see where are we making the serotonin. The vast majority of serotonin, for instance, is made in the gastrointestinal tract, and the bacteria in there play a very large role. And so what we're doing is we're altering the bacteria in our gut, our microbiome. And that also helps reduce our ability to detoxify, because very few people know that the bacteria in our gut, the good bacteria in our gut, actually help detoxify. So when you come in contact with mercury or aluminum or arsenic or anything else that's neurotoxic, the bacteria help make it safer for you and help you eliminate it from your body. So if you think about how much we've done to destroy those good guys in our gut, the good bacteria, and then you think about all the increasing number of toxins in our environment, we're much more vulnerable, and it's having consequences on our physical health. And the other thing is that the immune system is being completely dysregulated, both by the bacteria, the disruption of the bacteria, because they play a critical role in our immune health. They actually even manufacture immune cells. These bacteria are incredibly important to our immune system. And then what we do on top of that, we expose ourselves to toxins, which dysregulate the immune system, and then we over-vaccinate our children when they don't have the capability to manage the immunizations, because they are they're essentially, their immune systems are compromised. So when I say a perfect storm, it's really like there's no one thing that is causing the epidemic of autism. There's no one thing that makes every child develop ADHD. It's really a combination of things that have happened over the last few years, and it's kind of slow and insidious how the story has unfolded. But we're starting to understand it increasingly, which I'm very encouraged about.
Definitely. It is so encouraging, and it's nice to see, working within the alternative therapy worlds, there's always that barrier between the alternative therapy and the conventional medical world, which, we're working really, really hard to break those barriers down, to start looking at what else can be done, especially when you're looking along the lines of your stress and depression and the impact that has on a person's mental health. And if we can start to sort out the simple things, then it'll alleviate the problems for the medical profession that's always compromised. It's always under too much pressure. There's never enough staff. There's always a problem because of that side of things. If we can relieve and remove the people who have got problems because of the perfect storm things we've just been speaking about, if we can relieve that, then the people who really do need the help because of something else that's going on are going to get through the system and get that help quicker if it's a medical source that they need. Right.
No, the system is definitely taxed right now, and the fact of the matter is that there's going to be a buckling, because we cannot afford to continue to pay for all of the medications that people think they require, or we can't, the hospitalizations. Asthma, for instance, is part of this whole phenomenon. It's not just neurobehavioral disorders or learning disabilities. It's, the physical conditions like asthma. There's so many hospital visits every year due to, children who they need to be hospitalized because their asthma is so bad. And, that's a tremendous cost and a tremendous burden on the system. And in reality, for many kids, their asthma could be managed by changing their diet, by cleaning up their environment.
Yeah. And there's a lot of that underlying anxiety that is a big contributing factor to asthma.
Oh, absolutely. You're right.
The amount of people that I've worked with and spoken with about their asthma, and then when you find out specifically when they do their asthma as a behaviour rather than have asthmatic symptoms, when you question it that way, they'll give you examples of when they do it. And it is done in response to things rather than the need for an asthma attack per se. Poorly chosen words there, but they'll often start getting anxious or worried or concerned, job interview, going into a new building, shopping, closed spaces, different things like that start their asthma to go down to a spiral, and unpicking that completely resolves their asthma problem.
Mm-hmm.
There is people with genuine asthma, lung deficiency problems, so for them that is one thing, but there's always within an asthmatic, when they've got asthma, they've got an anxiety running because of the asthma itself, worrying if they're going to have an asthma attack.
Right.
Have they got enough inhalers?
Right.
So even if the asthma is not caused through anxiety, there is anxiety running with the asthma.
Right.
So there's so much that you can do to then, start to support that and show them alternative ways that they can deal with whatever it is that's the cause.
Right, absolutely. If you think about the cost of, for instance, using an intervention like NLP for asthma versus the hospitalizations, I mean, it's just, night and day in terms of what is going to stress the system. And it's such a better alternative from my perspective.
Definitely. So if someone came to you now, for example, what would happen? Where would you start in a way to identify the root cause, whether that be medically or epidemically, in relation to their autism or whatever behavioural problems that they're experiencing? Where would you advise our listeners that the source would, the first place to start looking and investigating would be?
Well, I always say, and this is the reason why I started my nonprofit organization, Epidemic Answers, the very first thing to do is to find a good holistic or integrative health practitioner, somebody who understands the mind-body connection, somebody who understands that we are a biology of systems, that, the lungs are not separate from the brain, which is not separate from the gut. Everything is integrated. And so sometimes that's going to see a naturopath, and sometimes that's going to see a homeopath, and sometimes it's going to see an MD or a nurse practitioner or somebody who has an integrative training or a functional medicine training, because these are the practitioners who understand how to get at the root causes. I think part of the problem is that we are so used to having to go to a conventionally trained medical doctor, and that's fine, except for there's limited solutions for this epidemic of chronic illness, because we are very much a symptom-driven and pharmaceutical-driven system. And so for chronic illnesses like autism and asthma, there are really no pharmaceutical solutions. In fact, the pharmaceutical solutions that are prescribed are making these people worse. So I always say the very first step is to, number one, find an integrative holistic practitioner to help you get to the root of your causes, because everybody is unique and everybody needs that personalized medicine, that personalized care. And the other thing is to start looking in your environment. And when I say that, I'm talking about looking at things that might be stressors in your environment. So that could include junk food, the diet. It could include electromagnetic radiation. It could include toxins in the environment. I mean, I usually tell people, what personal care products do you use? Are you using Tide and, Whisk and the things that have lots of fragrances in it? Are you using dishwasher detergent that has toxic bleach in it? Are you using shampoos that have phthalates and other kinds of endocrine disruptors in them? What kinds of stressors are you putting on your body? So, if you're going to make it very simple, step-by-step procedure, how do you reverse chronic illness? Number one, you find a holistic practitioner. And number two, you clean up your environment. And, and with regard to what NLP can do, that means cleaning up your mental and your emotional environment too, and trying to figure out what might be stressing your body and your system emotionally, spiritually, mentally. So really cleaning up your environment is physical, but it's also emotional as well.
It is emotional. That's one of the places that we start, especially when we're looking at someone's logical levels. And we always start at the foundation, which is going back to Bateson's work, where we look at their environment. And that can be whether they're coming from, whatever it is they're coming from. But we always start at their environment and the impact the environment has got on them, on that particular problem that they're having. If we don't sort the environment, we can't go to the next level being their capabilities and skills. If that isn't sorted, you can't go on to look at their behaviours. If that isn't sorted, you can't look at their beliefs or values. And then again, higher, it goes on to identity and goes on to mission. And it's all around realignment of that person. Well, if their environment is so scattered underneath their feet, they're not grounded. So from a spiritual point of view, if they're not grounded and their energy is all displaced because it's focusing on the inflamed bowel or different areas that we've discussed already, if it isn't in balance and it isn't aligned, then there's going to be problems with that person from an energy level, but also from a mental level, because they're almost wasting time on certain areas, certain behaviours, anxieties and beliefs that aren't needed. So we always do look at their environment, and the aim being to get a psychosocially stable environment. And once that has been addressed, then we can start looking at their behaviours, because a lot of their behaviours will have spiralled because of that environment. And that'll be their home environment, their work environment, their social environment with regards to the community they live in. from on there, once we can look and start unpicking that, we can then look at the skills they believe they have or they haven't got,
Right.
why those skills are important, what they believe about themselves in relation to those behaviours that they can do or the skills they can or they can't do. And it kind of all builds up until you get a sense of self.
Mm-hmm.
And as you say, it's environment, so it's the grounding, isn't it, for everybody?
Absolutely. And I cannot stress enough the importance of mothers with regard to this epidemic of chronic childhood illness. There are so many amazing, what we've come to call warrior moms who are aggressively trying to heal and recover their kids. I mean, they feel like, oh, my children have been exposed to all these environmental assaults, whether it's vaccines or antibiotics or toxins or whatever it is, and they're really, really focused and stressed about healing their kids. And then oftentimes they get their kids better to a point, and then they hit a roadblock. This actually happened to me as well, is where you feel like they get better, and then there's still a missing piece. And then what I learned, and I've also seen this many, many times with other mothers and parents, is that roadblock can be removed once the parent starts working on themselves. In other words, start sort of unraveling their emotional or psychological issues, or starts relaxing a little bit and starts de-stressing their own environment. And so because the children are so sensitive to what's going on with their parents, and they read every single behavior so deeply. And so when a parent is stressed, that is going to stress the child. So I feel like, working on the mom or the dad or whoever's the primary caregiver for that child is just as important as working on the child when they have a chronic illness.
I couldn't have put it better myself.
Yeah.
I couldn't. It certainly is. I don't think we appreciate how much of an impact we have, and children are just like sponges,
mm-hmm.
and they do absorb all of our behaviours, our beliefs, our values, everything. They learn and copy us. So that there's a lot that are learnt behaviours that are manifesting, and behaviours that maybe are created in a way to get a response.
Mm-hmm.
And then the response, because it gets that positive response, it might be a negative response they're getting what they want. Mm-hmm. So it's all that going back to attention seeking.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure there'll be a lot of mums that are listening now, or families that disagree with that kind of a statement, because there'll be some children that do have a lot of what's seen in NLP is they're very busy mentally, and a lot of their fluttery, anxious behaviour, for a want of a better word, is because we think of it as they're kind of playing two different stories and two different realities at once in their mind, mm-hmm. which is why they flick from one to another, or because there's so much going on, they just can't compute the reality of what's happening now.
Mm-hmm.
If there is a stressful environment at home, that would exacerbate those symptoms. So it is addressing that, and also for the children that do have those sensory problems. We see with autism that there is a lot of sensory problems where they're oversensitive with their hearing, or their sight is oversensitive, so they're seeing things at a much bigger detail than we are. So it's looking at what's actually going on. How can the parents really listen and watch their child, so that they can use tools that NLP provides in order to slow down and help that child to relax. And it's that, again, linking into the behaviour then. Once the child's relaxed, the parent is more relaxed, and everything starts to settle down.
Right, and it's easier for the parents at that point too to sort of address some of the things that are going on biochemically or physiologically with the kids. I mean, it's like the anxiety you mentioned, it's multifactorial usually, right? There's usually a microbial imbalance in the gut. There's usually some kind of emotional piece that they're reacting to or responding to in their environment. Sometimes it can be something going on biochemically, in terms of neurotransmitters. It can be an immune response that occurs. I mean, there's so many different factors to it, and it really does take that, that moment that parent needs to sit back and kind of calmly try and unwind the pieces that are playing into the symptoms, and it can be draining unless you can sort of get some perspective about it.
Very true. Well, Beth, I can't believe how quick our half an hour has gone. Can you tell our audience how they can get in contact with you, your website details, and buy your book from?
Sure. Well, my book is available on Amazon.com and Barnes & Nobles. It's A Compromised Generation. You can also go to my website, www.acompromisedgeneration.com. And my nonprofit is Epidemic Answers, which is epidemicanswers.org. So I can always be reached through one of those two websites.
Wonderful. Thank you, Beth. It's been a pleasure having you on today, and thank you so much for the amazing advice that you've shared and the work that you're doing to help so many people out there.
Thank you. Same to you, Donna.
You're welcome. And a big thank you to all of our audience for tuning in today. If you'd like to learn more about NLP, then tune in each week, and also visit my website, www.donnablinston.com, where you can pick up a copy of my best-selling book, Psychobabble, a straightforward, plain English guide to the benefits of NLP. Also visit theorganicview.com and sign up for our newsletter, which will keep you updated with the up-and-coming shows, guests, and online workshops. Once again, Beth, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you, Donna.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.